What's going on, you guys? And welcome back to another episode, the 20th episode of Push the Tempo podcast. It's your boy Aray, and I'm with my guy Kyle. And for the 20th episode, we got something special. We're going to be previewing the finals. We're going to do our predictions and all that, but that's going to come later on in the podcast. Before we get into that, we're going to be talking about the conference finals and just talking about all the matchups and stuff and what went down. So, with that being said, my guy Kyle, you want to talk about who do you want to talk about first? Which matchup?
Let's start with the one that just ended yesterday. I believe yesterday or 2 days ago. The Milwaukee Bucks closing out the Atlanta Hawks in 6 games. So right off the bat, the first thing that we're gonna talk about, obviously, besides that, the Bucks, advancing to their first finals since I believe 1974, is the Giannis injury. As of right now, I believe he's listed as questionable. He was upgraded from doubtful earlier today. But when that injury happened, it looked really bad. His leg bent backwards, and thankfully he was able to walk off the court under his own power. But you know, it looked like it could be something that troubles him, not just the rest of the Atlanta series, but also in the finals. So I just want to see him fully healthy. This finals, if both teams are fully healthy, I think is going to be really, really good. I could see it going either way, but you just gotta hope that he's okay and that both teams are at full strength.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. That injury looked really tough. One thing that came out of it that was a pretty positive for the Bucks is it gave them a lot of momentum. Like guys like Drew Holiday in the Brooklyn series were really struggling towards the end of it. I remember what did he go like 2 of 11 in the first half of Game 7 or something like that. And this really allowed Drew Holiday to get a lot of opportunity. Not only him, but Middleton's always going to be Middleton. He's a great scorer, and he's probably their most clutch shooter and player on that team. But even guys like Brook Lopez were getting hot, Bobby Portis, and this is kind of the momentum that the Bucks need. So I know I'm kind of previewing in the finals, but it really showed that the Bucks had a lot of people that stepped up. So that's one good thing that came out of this series. Although I know Giannis is hurt, and I think he actually just got upgraded to game time decision, which honestly, personally, is kind of scary because Giannis is a franchise player. He's still pretty young, 26 years old. So it's pretty scary that they're kind of risking it right off the bat. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. That injury was really brutal, and it's definitely going to be a great matchup if all teams are healthy, though.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying that they had to close out the series without Giannis, and a lot of credit, like you said, goes to Middleton and Drew Holiday, but also to guys like Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez as well. Brook Lopez had a really big game 5. Bobby Portis was pretty solid in this series after not really playing much against Brooklyn. But like you said, a lot of credit goes to Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton in particular. They really put the teams on their back, and when it looked like Atlanta was kind of closing the gap in Game 6, they had that huge fourth quarter. They had a little bit of a comeback. Chris Middleton, he kind of stemmed the tide and kind of hoarded them off by himself. So a lot of credit goes to him, and I know that Atlanta losing the last 2 games, like some people may look at it as a little bit of a disappointment, but at the same time, Trey Young was hobbled a little bit. He kind of struggled in Game 7, suffering a little bit with that ankle injury. But nobody really expected Atlanta to even be in the conference finals to begin with. Everybody thought Philadelphia would make relatively easy work of them. So them just being in this position, being such a young team with guys who are really intriguing, like Cam Reddish. Cam Reddish had a really good Game 6. He really showed out. Him, DeAndre Hunter didn't play. Kevin Herter. Like they have a lot of guys who are very intriguing for their future, and a lot of them are still like very young as well. It'll be interesting to see like what happens with Clint Capella. Not Clint Capella. Did you with John Collins in the offseason in regards to his contract? But Atlanta looks like they have a pretty good future like on the way. So I'm excited to see what they do moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, this series really just showed that Atlanta has a good young core. I mean, Trey Young was hurt most of this series, so there was a lot of pressure being put on him, and he performed in the earlier series. But in this one, of course, he got hurt, which really sucks. I wanted to see him go full out, and I guess there's an argument to be made if he was fully healthy through the duration of the series. with Giannis being hurt, that is the Hawks could have honestly come out with the dub in this series. But I mean, we can play the what if game all day long, but honestly, it just really showed me that the Hawks are for real. I don't know if this is going to be a case of the Heat where they go to they have a deep playoff run and just never show up again. But it was definitely an entertaining playoff run for the Hawks. Personally, after watching the series, I think this is kind of a hot take, but I think John Collins is pretty overrated in my opinion. I feel like he's more of an athletic version of Daniel Tice. Um, I don't know. He didn't really impress me a lot. But yeah, that's just kind of a random hot take. My bad. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. But yeah, you got any other thoughts?
Just that Bobby Portis, like I mentioned earlier, he was really, really good. Cam Reddish had a really, really good game six. Did he, I'm not sure. I don't remember correctly if he played like really well in game five, but I think he might have. Um, like he's a guy that dealt with injuries throughout the year, didn't play a lot, and just comes into a finals, Eastern Conference Finals series and makes an impact. So that's really impressive to me. You mentioned about John Collins. He had his moments where he looked really good in the playoffs, and then he had his other moments where it didn't look so good for him. So it'll be very interesting to see what Atlanta does and decides to do with him moving forward.
True. I don't want to make any speculations, but all right, hypothetically, all right, we're gonna do like a minute on this. Do you think he's gonna resign, or do you think he's gonna move on?
Honestly, man, it's I have no idea. Like I have no clue what his market is. I think some team will be willing to throw him a lot of money,
Mhm.
just because he's still very talented and he's still young. Uh, if Atlanta, I think Atlanta will be willing to match it if it's reasonable and what they think is reasonable. But yeah, I just have no clue. But I think he'll be back if I had to make a choice.
Yeah, if I'm not wrong, I believe he declined an extension, like an earlier extension, hoping he can get like a bigger bag. If I'm not wrong, so I mean that kind of tells me he's okay with going to a different team for more money. But seeing that Atlanta basically extended Nate McMillan and gave him a bag and a 4-year contract, I don't see why the Hawks wouldn't do the same for Collins. I still don't think he's that great in my personal opinion, but yeah, I guess it's enough about John Collins and the Hawks. You want to talk about the other series? We got the Clippers and the Suns, or do you have any other takes?
Nah, like you said, like possibly what if Trey had been healthy in this series? Maybe Atlanta would have been able to pull it out. But like I mentioned earlier, a lot of credit goes to Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton for closing them out. So speaking about what ifs, let's move on then to the Phoenix Suns and Clippers series. The Suns beat the Clippers in 6 games. I just want to get your thoughts right away. What were your impressions of this series?
Well, honestly, it showed me two things, or maybe two or three things. One is Devin Booker and Chris Paul. Honestly, man, I can't say how much I'm really impressed by how well they played. Who knows if it's just a playoff or one-time playoff run, but these guys really showed that they're here for real. Devin Booker's emotions, or the way he acted after getting that Western Conference Finals trophy. He seemed really calm, and I could tell that he was, ready for the next stage. He wanted to go on to the finals. With that being said, I'm gonna take a look at the Clippers. So the other thing that it showed me is Paul George. He really put up, and I know we talked about this last series, but I mean, yeah, he had some bad moments where he missed some free throws and all that, but I still think that Paul George really put on. And it's not much of a surprise that the Clippers couldn't really pull it up without Kawhi. I mean, I think we're all expected that. I don't think a lot of us expected the Clippers to even get past the last round with the Jazz with Kawhi being hurt. So it's definitely a great job. And we talked about in the last podcast how well Ty Lue did. But another thing that really goes understated in this series was Patrick Beverly. And we all know what happened with him and Chris Paul at the end of the game. And it really sucks to see that that one play kind of defined to a lot of, I guess you could say casuals, how well Beverly played. He was really putting in. And yeah, a lot of people are going to say he's a dirty player. I mean, Booker and him had a head collision. I don't necessarily think that was dirty. Then there was that Chris Paul screen where I guess you can argue was a little bit debatable, but some can argue that Chris Paul kind of leaned into it. Some could say that Beverly's a little dirty. I don't know. Either way, we're not going to be talking about that. I just want to see how well that Beverly really played. And honestly, I was pretty inspired by his defense. Most of you guys knows me, Marcus Smart fan, but that was pretty good performance by Patrick Beverly. I just want to hear your thoughts. I know you're a Clippers fan, so I feel like your thoughts going to hit a little bit more home.
So you mentioned about Devin Booker and Chris Paul. I kind of disagree. Honestly, Devin Booker had a really, really great game one, um, and Chris Paul had a really good game six. But outside of that, I didn't really think either of them were really that great in this series relative to their standards. Like Devin Booker had a couple rough shooting games, and in game four, or was it game five? I think it was game five. Devin Booker had a really, really good first three quarters, and then he kind of disappeared in the fourth. If you look at Chris Paul's numbers in Game Five, I think they look okay. I think he had like 18 and 9 or something like that. Let me just look at it real quick. He had 22 and 8, but he was a minus 15, and I thought every time he touched the ball, Phoenix's offense would just ground to a halt, and it would just be him just pounding the rock at the top of the key. Two guys that really impressed me for Phoenix in this series are and in my opinion, this guy was the best player in the series for the Suns. Was DeAndre Ayton and Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson, it felt like he didn't miss in this series. I think he was shooting like 70% from the field, and I don't even think that was the highest number on his team because DeAndre Ayton was also that good. Uh, DeAndre Ayton was the first big man that really could punish the Clippers for playing small, and he did exactly that. Whether it be scoring on them in the interior, being a lob threat that they weren't able to really figure out, and just attacking them on the offensive glass. I think a really underrated game from this series because everybody's gonna remember Devin Booker's 40-point triple double in game one, and Chris Paul's 40-point game to close out the series. But I think DeAndre Ayton's 19-point and 22 rebound game in game four, when both teams were stuck in the mud and there was that huge scoring drought in the fourth quarter. I think he was really the difference maker in the series. And I think he was the best player for the Suns in this entire series. He might not have the highs of Devin Booker's game one or Chris Paul's game six. But throughout the entire series, I think he was the most consistent player, and he made a huge difference in the series, and he's a really impressive player.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. In the words of Chris Paul, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing. Well, he's gonna get a bag thrown at him for sure. He definitely played well both ends of the floor. And honestly, I kind of agree with you. I don't want to take back what I said about Chris Paul and Booker. I know they didn't necessarily shoot that well, and those two, the first game for Booker and the last game for Chris Paul, kind of like overshadowed their bad shooting. I think it was game five or maybe it was I think it was game five where they were up 3-1. Yeah. So in that game, Chris Paul had a terrible game. But I just think that their leadership and Booker hitting those tough shots and Chris Paul staying poised, even though, for him this is pretty pressureful. I mean, imagine never making the finals in 16 or 17 year career, however long it's been. I don't know. I'd just say that leadership is really impressive. And I know we don't really get to see behind the scenes and all that, but this is a young core that the Suns have. And to me, it's personally like super impressive that, not only Chris Paul, but Devin Booker, but all these other guys are performing, stepping up, whether it's because of leadership or they're just there. I just thought that was pretty impressive from the Suns team. And not to mention, they're like hella fun to watch. I'm gonna lie. That's just my personal opinion. But yeah, no, I definitely agree. DeAndre Ayton was insane. I believe yeah, like you said, he was shooting something like insane, like 70% from the field, which even though he's a center, it's not like he only takes layups and dunks. He does do a lot of mid-range jumpers. So remember we had the argument, or not really an argument, or the conversation where I asked you if Bam was better than DeAndre Ayton. And it is recency bias, but nonetheless, DeAndre Ayton was really impressive this series as well.
So to your point about leadership, whatever, I think that's slightly overrated to me. Yeah, Chris Paul when he came, him rubbing off on some of the younger guys, definitely, it definitely made a difference. But in my opinion, Phoenix probably would have been at the very least a play-in team or like a 7 or 8 seed last year had DeAndre Ayton not gotten suspended. Because they were really good last year as well, particularly in the bubble. They went 8-0. Everybody knows about that. But I just think his like the whole leadership thing is slightly overblown. Like this is a good team with or without Chris Paul. Like they went up uh with a 2-0 series lead and Chris Paul didn't even play because Cam Payne, who his his journey from being like a bad, like just bench player who didn't play to a guy who's like a legit sixth man on a title contender. That's really impressive to me. He was basically giving the Suns what Chris Paul would have and more. Because I think in game two, he had like 29 points and 8 assists with 0 turnovers. As good as Chris Paul is at this stage of his career, Chris Paul is not giving you that unless it's like an outlier game. So, um, you know, uh, the whole leadership thing to me is slightly overblown. With or without Chris Paul, this is a really good team. Are they a championship team without Chris Paul? No, but if you put a guy who's maybe slightly worse than Chris Paul, just like a solid point guard who doesn't make a lot of mistakes next to Devin Booker and on the Suns team, I think they'll probably still be like a top four seed because they're just that good to me. Um, on the Clippers side, like you said, Paul George had some rough games. He had some rough moments, but I mean, there's really not a lot you can expect from him. Being down the team's best player and him really being the guy who has to get everything going, whether it be like being a ball handler, a playmaker, defending like the number one option because Kawhi's out. It's just a lot of stuff that he had to do. And at the end of the day, while he put up like an admirable effort, it just wasn't enough. And the Suns are really good, and there's really nothing to be ashamed of because without Kawhi, this is a series they were supposed to lose regardless. It's not like it's a disappointment that they lost the series. So there's that. I thought, like you mentioned, I thought Pat Beverly did a solid job on Devin Booker and Chris Paul in this series. Uh, you know, there were some moments like you mentioned, the push, the Chris Paul, which was stupid. He shouldn't have done that. The Devin Booker thing, which I do believe is an accident, not a great look though. I thought he did a solid job defending Booker. I thought Reggie Jackson was really good in this series. Reggie Jackson probably worked himself and played himself out of whatever the Clippers could offer him in the offseason because he's a free agent. But I think he was averaging like 22 points per game after Kawhi went down. So huge props to him as well. Yeah, the Clippers at the end of the day, every finals run, every championship run, you have to be good and you have to be lucky. And in no way am I trying to like demean what the Suns have done because they've been a really good team all year. But the Clippers were definitely good enough to win the championship. They just weren't lucky enough. Kawhi went down at the worst possible time and wasn't able to come back. But that doesn't take away from how good the Suns are. The Suns are still a very good team.
Yeah, most definitely. I definitely agree with you. With that being said, do you want to talk about a little bit about the finals preview?
Yeah, let's do it. What are your predictions for the finals?
I mean, all right. So I don't want to say I'm stuck in the fence, but I feel like there's really two ways this can go. It's either going to be Suns win overwhelmingly, or it could really swing in Milwaukee's momentum. So as I talked about before in this podcast episode, they really have that momentum. Even without Giannis, Middleton was on fire. Drew Holiday bounced back. Lopez, all these other players are really stepping up. I think that this momentum can really help out. I know on the other side of things, the Suns, although they were completely healthy for the most part, they still don't have that same momentum. I'm not feeling that momentum. Devin Booker hurt himself with that headbutt with Beverly. Chris Paul is still getting up there in age, and yeah, his last game was really good, but like you said before, they weren't shooting as efficiently as they were in the previous series. So it comes down to me, at least in terms of the momentum. And on top of that, the young core, we don't really know how they're going to perform. Like you mentioned before, Cam Johnson was shooting something like 70% from the field. We don't know if that's going to happen again, if that was just a fluke. You know what I mean? Like they're not proven. On the other side of things, the Bucks are somewhat proven. I mean, we all know Giannis, if he's healthy, Defensive Player of the Year, MVP. Chris Middleton is probably the most clutchest player. Drew Holiday has always been like an all defensive player and an underrated player, an all star level player. So I mean, there's always a chance for Milwaukee to go up. And I know like analysts have the Suns like overwhelmingly winning by six, Suns and six. I think that's the consensus right now. And if you'd be betting, you'd have to take the Suns because they're the favorites. You know what I mean? So I think it's kind of tough, but in my opinion, I'm still gonna stick with the Suns just because I think, and I know we have the same opinion here, but I just think that their coaching is well beyond the Bucks coaching, and on top of that, they have some players that like I really believe in the players that they have, like guys like Jay Crowder, they can defend and shoot, and as long as the team stays consistent, I think the Suns can win. What do you think?
Yeah, I also lean Suns in six for a couple of the reasons that you mentioned. Like you mentioned that Monty Williams is a really really good coach, and there's been times where Mike Budenholzer has shown to not be able to adjust to the opposing team's game plan, and Monty Williams is going to throw everything that Budenholzer can handle and more. So I also lean towards the Suns. I do think there's some things that Milwaukee can do to, because this is a really close series, and this to me, like I said earlier, could go either way. Um, I think if Milwaukee plays with Giannis at the five for like a majority of each game, like say like 35, like 36 minutes a game, and it limits the time that Brook Lopez is on the court with Chris Paul, I think that they can really put themselves in a good position because at this point in his career, Chris Paul is not a guy who's gonna get downhill. He's not gonna, blow by people because just he's old, like he's 36. At this point in his career, he's really a guy who tries to hunt out mismatches and takes advantage of weak links. So if the Bucks run like a hypothetical lineup of say Pat Connaughton, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, PJ Tucker, and Giannis, like with Giannis as the five. Chris Paul, there's not really a weak link that Chris Paul is going to exploit. Like he's not going to be able to attack like a player and drop off like a screen like he would against Brook Lopez or like against Bobby Portis or like he did. One of the main reasons he got loose in Game 6 versus the Clippers was that he would just attack DeMarcus Cousins over and over. So I think if Milwaukee plays with Giannis at the five for a majority of the series, I think they can give them. I think they'll be in good shape, and they can give themselves a really good chance. But that remains to be seen, and not only that, it remains to be seen if Giannis will be healthy. Because like you said earlier, he's questionable for Game 1. Um, but no, I will. I also lean Suns in six. But this series, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bucks win, and I'd be pretty happy if the Bucks win. Giannis he's really good. Them being being able to beat the the Brooklyn Nets, regardless of the Nets being injured, with being able to really take that the best punch that Kevin Durant could give them and still win is very impressive to me. And Giannis, he's had some shortcomings in the playoffs the last couple years, and him breaking through, being only 26 and winning his first finals would be really cool to see.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair point. It's just at this point, it's just hard to say that the Bucks are gonna win. I definitely can see it happening, but I just feel like it's overwhelmingly in the favorites or the odds of the Suns. I think that games 1 and 2 are probably going to be the most critical games because if hypothetically Giannis doesn't play, if they were able to steal a game with their momentum in games 1 or 2 at the Suns' home, I think that that would be super critical in helping the Bucks beat the Suns. You know what I mean? Like that home court advantage can really help. Honestly, the Suns and four guy, he really put me on the Suns fan base, yo. They're really that stadium is really overwhelmingly like they're insane. You know what I mean? Um, I just think that the Bucks, if they were able to steal a game in 1 or 2, that this would definitely help them. I thought that Giannis would probably set out games 1 and 2 anyway. So if they're able to steal that one game, it's gonna be huge. But if they're not, it's going to be tough for them, especially if Giannis comes back later in the series. Because it's not like, for example, Trae Young when he first came back from his injury, it's not like he played completely well. Same thing with Harden. We all know that it doesn't just take one game for an injured player to come back and be good again. You know what I mean? And that injury didn't look that great as well. You know, so I just think that they need this game 1 or 2 in order to kind of boost their odds. What do you think?
Yeah, no, you make some good points for sure. Like you mentioned, it all depends on health, man. The Suns have had some things go their way, some lucky breaks with in terms of opponents' injuries, and you can't knock them because at the end of the day, they're really good. And like I mentioned, you need some level of luck and some level and to be good at the same time to make the finals and win the championship. But it would be really nice to see a series where they play a fully healthy or relatively fully healthy team.
Definitely. And if I'm not wrong, some of these games are not like every other day. So I believe in between games 2 and 3, there's gonna be like a 3 day break. I think this is definitely gonna be to Milwaukee's advantage. Especially if Giannis is unable to play in games 1 or 2, or even if he does come back, he can get more time to rest and heal up. especially going back home. So I think that that's going to be a huge swing compared to the every other day that they were playing in the conference finals. So I don't know. It's really tough. In my opinion, I can't really make a proper assessment. And I know this is kind of like cheating, but honestly, it's hard for me to pick a side until the games 1 and 2 are finished. And I know that's, like I said, that's cheating, but yeah, it's tough. It's tough. But yeah, either way, one thing I will say is there's a lot of variables. Like none of these players on either team have been to a finals except for Jay Crowder. So that's just one thing to look at. We know the Suns team is really young, and we know that Giannis isn't healthy right now. We don't know what's gonna go on. I know you mentioned that really good plan about Giannis at the five, but we don't know if Mike Budenholzer is going to do that or not, or what's going to happen. I just think that there's a lot of variables, and either way, you can't argue with the outcome. It's going to be a pretty entertaining series.
Yeah, I hope we can get a fully healthy series because, both these teams are really good. Milwaukee is, they really showed that they have the goods, man. Like they beat Brooklyn. Everybody thought they were, including myself, thought they were dead in the water after game 5, after that disaster in game 5 against Brooklyn. But they bounced back. And then they lost Giannis in game 4. I think it was game 4 against Atlanta, and then they bounced back and closed them out. So, you know, them, going the distance and now being in the finals, you would hate to see them, lose without, being given like a full chance, a full fighting chance and not being fully healthy. But, at the same time, Phoenix is also really good. Them they've taken care of business regardless of what you want to say about injuries that they've played against. They took care of business against the Lakers. The games 5 and 6 were not close at all. They I don't think any game versus the Nuggets was particularly close, if my memory serves me correctly. And even though every game that they won versus the Clippers was close, besides Game 6, at the end of the day, they were able to pull out every single game, regardless of how it happened. They were still able to close them out. So they also deserve a ton of credit.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you, man. It's really tough. Yo, guys, leave a comment on our videos. Let us know who you guys predict as soon as this comes out. But yeah, let us know. You got anything else to say?
No, I think I'm good.
Where do you want to call it for this episode?
Sounds good to me.
Word. All right, guys. We appreciate you guys for listening to our podcast. You guys can check us out at YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you guys listen to your podcast. We're there under Push the Tempo podcast with Aray and Kyle. Other than that, guys, if you guys have any questions, you guys can always email us or any hot takes. We'll put you and feature you on our channel as well as our podcast. So let us know. With that being said, we'll catch you guys later, and we'll probably see you guys maybe halfway through the series of the finals or after the finals. So with that being said, peace out, guys, and see you in the next episode.